Good afternoon. Today's talk will be to provide you with a very brief plot summary of Book 2 of Gulliver's Travels, which is titled A Voyage to Brobdingnag. In the introductory chapter of Book 2, which as I said is titled A Voyage to Brobdingnag, we learn that Gulliver is home for only 2 months when he and the crew of the Adventure, the ship that he sails, set sail for Surat. A storm blows their ship far off course. When they finally set sight on land, the captain sends a crew, including Gulliver, to explore the land they have sighted. While the crew looks for drinking water, Gulliver explores another part of the island. The men are set upon a huge creature. They encounter a huge creature that chases them back into the ocean and to their ship. Gulliver, who was investigating the shore of the new country separately, is left behind. So, this is essentially the context in which Gulliver finds himself alone in the second voyage. Eventually, Gulliver is discovered by several of these huge creatures that are in reality very large human beings, giant like. These giants proved to be friendly and curious, and eventually, one of the giants, who happens to be a farmer, takes Gulliver to his farmhouse where the farmer's friendly family receives him. So, this is what happens in chapter 1 of book 2. In the next chapter, we get to know that of all the members of the farmer's family which took Gulliver in, the farmer's daughter is the most fascinated by Gulliver. He seems almost like a walking, talking doll, a live doll as it were to her. She enjoys caring for him and even gives him a new name, which is Grilrig. She takes such good care of Gulliver that he calls her his Doomdalcritch or nurse. News of Gulliver's living at the farmer's house spreads quickly, and several visitors come to see him because he's obviously unique because of his diminutive size compared to the rest of the population of that particular island. At the urging of one particular gentleman there, the farmer decides to take Gulliver to the market and to put him on display for others to see for a price. This being successful, the farmer decides to take Gulliver on tour throughout the kingdom, including visiting the kingdom's metropolis, which is termed Lordulgrod. There, Gulliver performs 10 times a day for all who wish to see him, again at a price which goes to the farmer. By this time, though, Gulliver has presented far too many performances and he is almost dead with fatigue or tiredness. This is how chapter 2 ends. In chapter 3, the queen of the kingdom asks for an audience with the farmer, and Gulliver performs admirably and respectably for her. The queen, being attracted to the novelty of this tiny man, sets a price and buys Gulliver from the farmer. Included in this arrangement is the farmer's daughter, who becomes a member of the queen's court as some form of a nurse to Gulliver. Now, conversing with the king, Gulliver tells him about English, his native language, about English customs, about English politics. The king appears amused. He laughs at the fierceness of such tiny insects, as he says. In other words, for the king of that size, Gulliver and his species would appear tiny. Gulliver dares not refute the king's opinion. He has to accept the king's opinion as true, even though it may appear to be insulting to him, personally and collectively. Indeed, before long, he adopts his host's point of view. The king and the queen are happy with Gulliver, but there is one member of the royal entourage who is not happy and who happens to be the queen's dwarf. who is jealous obviously because Gulliver has replaced him in the competition for the queen's affection. Chapter 4 of this particular book shows that when the king and queen go traveling about the country, they decide to take Gulliver along. Gulliver describes the island, the sea around the island, the metropolis, the king's palace, Gulliver's methods of travels on the island, and several of the island's inhabitants, and also some of the sights to see on the island. So, in this particular chapter, a significant portion of the chapter actually goes into a physical description of the island that Gulliver is in Book 2. In describing the inhabitants of the island, Gulliver focuses on their illnesses and diseases. He mentions, for instance, giant beggars. Obviously, the beggars would be appearing giant to him, who were horribly deformed with lice crawling all over them. Gulliver compares the sights to similar sights in his homeland in England. And finally, the dimensions of the king's palace are described in some detail, with particular attention to the kitchen, which is described in far greater detail as to the contents of the kitchen in terms of its ability to supply the royal entourage food. In chapter 5 of the book, the next chapter, we find that Gulliver's mishaps continue. The queen's dwarf drops a barrel-sized apple on him. They appear hailstones as big as tennis balls maybe. It batters and bruises Gulliver. A bird of prey nearly grabs him, and a Spaniard picks him up in his mouth and carries him to the royal gardener. So these are the mishaps which are occurring to Gulliver essentially because of his diminutive size compared to every other living being in the island. Gulliver is insulted there, to be coddled and played with by the maids of honor. To them, obviously, Gulliver is a living toy, a doll, not a man. So they undress in front of him without any thought of modesty. And the maids generally repulse Gulliver. He is particularly annoyed when the maids go on in their daily chores, which would have been done privately in front of him, as if neglecting him entirely, his existence entirely. Because Gulliver is a sailor, the queen has a toy boat made for him and a trough with which to sail. The royal ladies also take part in the game and make a brisk breeze with their fans. Disaster strikes when a frog hops into the trough and nearly swamps Gulliver's boat, but Gulliver bravely drives the monster off with an oar. One day, a monkey happens to seize Gulliver and carries him to the top of the palace. And Gulliver is finally rescued, and when he is recovered, he is summoned by the king, who is curious to know, essentially, as to whether Gulliver was afraid of conducting himself or living in the island. Because obviously, every element in the island, every living creature in the island, were entities of enormous size, and for them, Gulliver was nothing but an insignificant and living doll. Gulliver boasts that he could have protected himself with his sword, but hearing this, the king guffaws at the little man's pride. The next chapter shows Gulliver entertaining himself and demonstrating his ingenuity by using the king's beard stubble to make a comb, and by using strands of the queen's hair to make chairs and a purse. In addition, in this chapter we find that Gulliver plays the piano, the snippet, for the king and queen, and by using sticks formed as cudgels to bang on the keys as he runs up and down a piano bench. So essentially it's the diminutive Gulliver again happening to confront with a gigantic sized musical instrument, and essentially he has to run over it, to run through it as it were through the keys to give out music. The king also holds several audiences with Gulliver to discuss the culture of Gulliver's home country, that is England. In these audiences, as requested by the king, Gulliver explains the role of the people in the operation of the government, in religion, in the legal system, among other topics. The king, after asking many questions related to all that Gulliver tells him, concludes his audience with a summary and an assessment of what he hears. So essentially, what we are getting in this particular chapter is that there is a significant amount of divergence of both opinion and etiquette and ethics between Gulliver's country, that is England, and the place where he is in. In the next chapter, which is chapter 7, Gulliver decides that the king's lack of enthusiasm for England springs essentially from his ignorance of the country. And to remedy this, Gulliver offers to teach the king about England's magnificence. One of the first lessons that Gulliver teaches the king describes England's most valuable assets in Jonathan Swift's time. Asset in a military sense, which is gunpowder. Now, describing the effects of gunpowder graphically and at great length, Gulliver tells the king that gunpowder would be a great boon for his own kingdom, and with it, the king could reduce virtually all his subjects to slavery through that element of fear that gunpowder or its use brings in. The king is horrified by the suggestion. It never occurred to him that he has to uh, frighten his subjects into submission. He rejects such a bloodthirsty and inhuman proposal, warning that the impotent and groveling insect, as he is called, that he will be executed if he ever mentions gunpowder again. So that is how Gulliver is silenced with reference to the gunpowder and its destructive qualities. Gulliver drops the subject of gunpowder and gives us an account of the customs and government of his hosts. The army of his hosts is a national guard or some form of militia in modern day sense. There are no professional soldiers. As for government, it is extremely simple. There are no refinements, no mysteries, intrigues, or state secrets. The governance essentially depends on common sense, mercy, and swift justice. The average citizen or a subject in that particular island learns, and the learning consists essentially of only morality driven by common sense and the idea of the general good, history, poetry, and practical mathematics. Incidentally and interestingly, the subjects there cannot understand abstract reasoning or ideas. Their laws must contain only 22 words, as we know, and must be absolutely clear and unambiguous, without any scope for any misunderstanding. Their libraries are small, and the books are written in a clear, lucid style. Chapter 8 of the book, the next chapter, informs us that Gulliver spends 2 years in that particular island, but he is not happy. He has perhaps lived too long, and despite the royal family's pampering, he is afraid that he will never escape and turn into some sort of a domestic pet in the royal household. Escape apparently seems impossible for him. However, he gets a chance once. On a trip to the seashore, an eagle swoops down, snatches up the box Gulliver travels in, and drops it into the sea. The box is driven by the wind close to an English ship and is spied by some sailors who retrieve Gulliver and his possessions. Gulliver does not easily adjust to his fellow Englishmen, having lived in a totally different environment for 2 years. And obviously, after living for 2 years in a totally different environment, he has convinced himself that all Englishmen are essentially midgets compared to the people who are hosting him there. Everything looks tiny back home. He feels some form of a difficulty in adjusting visually to sizes, and essentially, when he goes home, he feels that his perspective will take time to heal in terms of his distorted ability to see sizes and to relate to sizes in a new norm. So, this is how Gulliver's second voyage or second trip ends, it ends rather accidentally, as we see an eagle swooping down and picking up the box in which Gulliver is traveling and throwing him into the sea. And incidentally, this episode is also indicative of some form of a ploy, as it were, thematic or narrative ploy of Jonathan Swift to somehow morally justify Gulliver leaving his hosts, who are very kind hosts to him, who cared him for 2 years with an abundance of love. The implication being Jonathan Swift had to somehow take Gulliver away from his hosts, but nevertheless spare Gulliver of the some form of a moral, some form, it's like sparing Gulliver from some form of a moral ignominy, for the want of any other word, of having left his hosts without informing them. So essentially, that is the ploy which Swift employs at the fag end. So at the end of the second book, we somehow cannot blame Gulliver for having left his hosts who were so kind hosts to him. So this is what happens in plot wise in book 2. In my next talk with you, we will be critically discussing this book in the context of several critical theories and try to develop an opinion as to why this particular book may be important, both in literature, literary criticism, as well as in culture studies. Thank you.